She woke to candlelight and the scent of something ancient, wax and cedar, and a faint sweetness that did not belong to any flower she could name, though she could not, in that first terrible moment, have said whether she had ever known the name of a flower at all. The ceiling above her was vaulted stone, traced with carved vines that had been worn smooth by centuries of cold air. She lay on a bed far too large for her small body, draped in linens the color of cream that had begun to yellow at the edges. A single candelabra burned on the nightstand, its 5 flames perfectly still despite the draft she could feel threading beneath the door. She sat up slowly. Her hands were bare. Her feet were bare. She wore a white sleeping gown she did not recognize, with lace at the wrists so fine it was nearly translucent. The gown was not hers. She felt certain of that with a deep animal certainty, the way one is certain of wrongness before the mind has assembled its reasons. She was certain of very little else. There was no name she could find for herself. She reached inward, the way one reaches for a word that has gone momentarily missing, and found nothing. Not a gap. An absence, as though the container where a name should have been had been emptied and sealed. She swung her legs off the bed and stood. The stone floor was shockingly cold beneath her bare feet, and the chill helped her think. She crossed to the window. A narrow lancet window fitted with old glass, the kind that warped the world outside into liquid shapes. Beyond it she could see nothing but darkness and, distantly, the silhouette of trees standing like sentinels against a sky that was not quite black. Deep violet, bruised at its edges, not yet dawn then. Perhaps not for hours. The room held a wardrobe, a writing desk bearing nothing, a mirror in a tarnished silver frame. She went to the mirror. The girl who looked back at her was pale and dark-haired. Her eyes a gray that bordered on colorless, her mouth pressed into a thin, uncertain line. She did not recognize the face. That was the worst part. Not that she had no name, but that she could look at her own reflection and feel nothing of homecoming. She tried the door. It opened. The corridor beyond was lit by sconces set into the walls at long intervals, their flames identical in their uncanny stillness to those in her room. The hall was wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast without touching. Mined on one side with paintings she could not examine in such poor light, and on the other with bare stone. The carpet runner beneath her feet was dark red, worn to near nothing at its center. The mansion, she corrected herself, feeling the word materialize from somewhere, breathed around her, not metaphorically. She could hear something like breathing in the structure itself, a slow, deep, rhythmic presence, as though the walls were alive and merely resting. She walked. She did not know why she walked toward the sound of pages turning rather than away from it. Perhaps because everything else was silence. She followed the corridor to its end, descended a half-flight of stairs she nearly missed in the dark, turned left, and found herself before a door from which soft amber light leaked at the threshold. She knocked twice, quietly. She did not know why she knocked rather than simply opening it. Only that something in the quality of the silence beyond the door discouraged presumption. "Come in." The voice was low, not loud, not commanding. It had no need to be. It was the voice of someone who had long since ceased to expect to be disobeyed. She opened the door. The room was a library, floor to ceiling, every wall consumed by shelves, and the shelves consumed by books. Not orderly rows, but a dense accumulation. Volumes stacked horizontally atop vertical ones. Scrolls wedged into gaps. Papers folded and tucked with the confidence of a man who remembered exactly where everything was. 3 fireplaces occupied the room's length, all burning low. The smell of old leather and smoke was almost overwhelming. He was seated in a wingback chair near the central fireplace, a book open in his lap, and he was looking at her. Old was not the right word. He wore perhaps 35 years on his face, though even that estimate felt provisional and somehow dishonest. His hair was dark and pulled back without ornament. His clothing was black, formal in its cut, with no concession to informality even at what must have been the small hours of the morning. His eyes across the dim room were the color of dark amber, nearly brown, not quite. He did not appear surprised to see her. "You're awake," he said. "I don't know who I am," she said. She had not meant to begin there, but there it was. Something moved in his expression, too controlled to be called emotion, but present nonetheless, like the shadow of something passing over still water. "No," he said quietly. "You wouldn't. Not yet. You know who I am." It was not quite a question. He studied her for a moment before closing the book, not marking his place, which told her something, though she could not have said precisely what. "Yes," he said, "I do. Then tell me." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he would not answer. "Then sit down. The fire is warm. I will tell you what I am able to tell you tonight, and you will decide what questions to ask after." "That is not a complete answer." "No," he agreed, "it isn't, but you are in my house, and you are not yet well, and I would prefer you sit before you fall." She considered refusing. Then she sat, because her legs were, in fact, trembling. She had woken without a name, in a dark mansion, in a white gown that was not hers. The man across from her was not entirely what he appeared to be. She did not know how she knew that. But she knew it with the same deep certainty she had felt about the gown. He was watching her the way one watches something fragile that one has been tasked with keeping whole. She did not yet know what to do with that. He gave her a name to use, at least temporarily. "There are papers in this house that identify you," he said, his voice unhurried, the book closed on the side table beside him. "Documents, a portrait, evidence of a lineage stretching back several generations. The name in those documents is Cordelia." She turned it over in her mind. It did not produce recognition, but it did not feel wrong either, the way borrowed shoes might still fit if the difference in size were small enough. "Cordelia," she said aloud. The sound of it was neutral. She would keep it. "And you?" she asked. "Ambrose," he said. "Lord Ambrose Vale. This estate is Ravensmoor. You have been in this house for approximately 3 days. You were brought here unconscious, by means I will explain when you are steadier." She watched him. He spoke with economy, nothing wasted, nothing offered voluntarily beyond what was needed. She noticed that he had not yet moved from his chair, had not shifted position or crossed his legs, or done any of the small, unconscious things people did when in the presence of an unknown quantity. He was entirely still. It was not the stillness of effort. It was natural, bone deep, as though stillness were his resting state and motion required intention. 3 days, she said. "Where did I come from?" "We found you at the edge of the northern wood. Collapsed at the boundary marker. You were alone. We, myself and my man Tobias." He inclined his head fractionally toward the door, indicating some presence elsewhere in the house. "He is elderly and harmless, and will bring you tea in the morning if you wish it." "What boundary marker?" A pause, not hesitation. He did not seem like a man given to hesitation, but a careful calibration. "This estate has certain boundaries, markers that demarcate protected land from unprotected land. You were found precisely at 1. She let that settle. There was something he was not saying, a layer beneath the statement, but she lacked the information necessary to pry at it yet. "Am I a prisoner here?" she asked. She watched something move across his face again, that same controlled almost reaction. Not offense, something closer to sadness perhaps, though even that felt like too large a word for what his face permitted. "No," he said, "but you cannot leave tonight. The wood is not safe in darkness for someone without." He paused. "For someone in your current condition, my current condition being that I have no memories." "Yes." She looked down at her hands in her lap. They were small, cold, the knuckles slightly reddened from the chill. Not the hands of someone who had lived softly, she thought. There were faint calluses at the base of her fingers, a thin scar on the back of her right wrist she did not remember acquiring. "You said there are documents," she said. "A portrait." "There are. I would like to see them." "In the morning." He looked at her steadily, not unkindly. "You are still pale. The color in your face has not returned to what it ought to be. There is soup in the kitchen. Tobias prepared it before he retired. You should eat." "I am not hungry." "That is not the same as not needing to eat." It was said plainly, without reproach. She looked at him again. This man named Ambrose Vale, who sat in his chair in his library in the small hours of the morning as though he had been waiting for her, or waiting for something, for a very long time. "What are you?" she asked. The question came out before she had decided to ask it. She saw his stillness deepen, if such a thing were possible, and his amber eyes across the fire's distance seemed to catch the light and hold it fractionally longer than they should have. "What do you think I am?" he said. It was not deflection. He was genuinely asking, the way a tutor might ask a student to examine their own reasoning. She thought carefully. She thought about the utter stillness of him, the candlelight that did not flicker even in the draught, the way the house seemed to breathe with his presence at its center, the fact that he was awake at this hour with the ease of a man for whom night was not an inconvenience but a native habitat, the way he had said the northern wood is not safe at night, with the slight implication that it was not unsafe for him. "Something old," she said finally. "Something that has been here a very long time." He regarded her for a moment. "Yes," he said simply. That was all. She would understand she had been given something, a partial truth delivered without condescension, and that he would not elaborate further tonight. He had boundaries of his own, this man, and they were not the boundaries of dishonesty but of careful disclosure. He would tell her what she needed when she could bear it. She found she respected that. She could not have said why. She, who did not even know her own name, who had no remembered template against which to measure trustworthiness. But she respected it. She ate the soup. It was cold by the time she found it in the kitchen, but it was good. Thick with root vegetables and herbs, prepared with genuine care. The kitchen was enormous and old and immaculate. She found a blanket folded over a chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, and stood at the kitchen window looking out into the garden, where the violet pre-dawn sky had begun to pale almost imperceptibly at its edges. Somewhere in the house behind her, she heard a door close. Then silence. She did not feel afraid. That itself, she thought, was the strangest thing of all. Morning came slowly to Ravensmoor as though the house resisted it. The light that eventually penetrated the thick curtains of the bedroom she had been given was gray and diffuse, filtered through cloud and old glass until it arrived in the room with no warmth left in it. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the house. Distant footsteps that must have been the elderly Tobias, the creak of a door somewhere below, wind finding gaps in the stone facade and singing thinly through them. Ambrose, she noted, made no sound at all. Tobias was exactly as described. Elderly, quiet, his face a map of deep wrinkles above a white collar, his manner careful and slightly formal. He brought tea without her having to ask for it, and when she thanked him, he nodded once with the air of a man to whom thanks were unnecessary, being only the expected result of duties properly fulfilled. "His lordship asks if you are well enough to see the gallery," Tobias said. "I am," she said. The gallery was on the second floor, a long room that ran the length of the east wing, with windows on one side and paintings on the other. Ambrose was already there when Tobias brought her to it. Standing near the far end, his hands clasped loosely behind him, studying a painting she could not yet see. He turned when she entered. He looked in the daylight, such as it was, precisely as he had looked the night before, as though light were irrelevant to him. His dark clothing had not changed. Perhaps he had not slept. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She walked the length of the room toward him, and as she walked, she passed the portraits. They were arranged chronologically, she realized. The oldest nearest the door, painted in styles she recognized as ancient. The subjects in period dress, their faces rendered with varying degrees of skill. She slowed as she passed them. Women and men from other centuries looked back at her with the fixed expressions of painted immortality. She stopped before one. It was a woman, young, perhaps her own age, wearing the high-collared dark gown of what she estimated was 2 centuries past. Her hair was dark. Her eyes were painted a gray so pale they were almost silver. Her face was her face. Not similar, not resemblant, identical, in the way that a reflection is identical, allowing for the distortions of time and medium. Cordelia stared. "Who is this?" she asked, though her voice had gone very quiet. Ambrose had crossed to stand beside her. He looked at the painting with an expression she could not read, old and careful, something guarded behind the amber of his eyes. "That is Azora Vane," he said, "painted in the year 1742. She was the last of her bloodline, here in this region." He paused. "The documents I mentioned last night bear the name Vane. A different spelling by 2 centuries of drift, but the same lineage." Cordelia looked at the woman in the portrait. At herself, in paint, in a gown 200 years removed. She lived here, she managed. "She was brought here," Ambrose said quietly, "under circumstances not entirely unlike yours." She turned to look at him. He was watching the portrait, not her, and in the gray morning light his profile was very still. "You knew her?" Cordelia said. A pause. "Yes. She died." "Yes." His voice did not change in tone or register, but something in the syllable was different, weighted, carrying more than one word should. She looked again at the portrait, at this woman who had her face, who had lived 2 centuries before her, who had been brought to this house. She looked at the slight parting of Isidora Vane's painted lips, as though she had been caught mid-breath, and she thought, "She wore my face her entire life, and I cannot remember a single hour of mine." "The locket around her neck," Cordelia said. "In the portrait?" "Yes." "Is it in this house?" The pause this time was slightly longer. "Come with me," he said. He led her back through the gallery and down a different corridor, one she had not seen yet, to a room that was not quite an office, and not quite a study, more like a repository. Cabinet after cabinet, glass-fronted, containing objects, labeled, catalogued, arranged with scholarly precision. She understood then that the library had not merely been his casual reading room. It was part of something larger. He was, she realized, some species of archivist of his own history. He opened one of the cabinets and took from it a small velvet pouch. He held it out to her, and she took it and opened it and tipped the contents into her palm. A locket, silver, or something like silver, with an engraving on its face. A pattern she could not quite resolve into a recognizable symbol. Old, very old. And when her fingers closed around it, she gasped. Not pain, not exactly. A flash of something. A room, firelight, a woman's voice speaking a word she could not catch. And then gone, like a dream, dissolving in the moment of waking. She opened her fingers and looked at the locket lying in her palm. "What was that?" she said. Ambrose was watching her with close, careful attention. "Blood memory," he said. "A fragment. The object carries residue of those who have held it." He paused. "Cordelia, your connection to that bloodline is not incidental. Something brought you here, to this property, to this boundary, and I do not believe you came by chance." She looked up at him. "You mean something sent me." "Or something called you," he said. "There is a difference." The locket was warm in her hand now, though she had taken it from an unheated cabinet. She closed her fingers around it carefully. "Then tell me about Isidora Vane," she said. "All of it." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I think it is time." He told her the beginning at least. Isidora Vane had come to Ravensmoor in the winter of 1742, carried unconscious through the northern wood by a man who had since died, a human servant, long gone. She had carried no identification, no luggage, nothing but the locket around her neck and a wound on her left arm, already healing in a way that suggested her bloodline was not entirely ordinary. She had no memories either, Cordelia said. "No," Ambrose said, "none." He was standing near the window in the repository, not looking at it, looking at nothing in particular, with the focused inattention of a man choosing his words from a very large collection. The condition is not accidental. It is called a suppression glamour, a working placed on the mind that locks the self away deep enough, and the affected person cannot access their own identity, their past, their name. It is reversible. Who would do that, and why? The glamour is difficult, old. It takes considerable power to cast. His amber eyes moved to her. "It was used twice in my knowledge of history. Once on Isidora, once, it appears, on you." The room was very quiet. She could hear the wind against the windows and, faintly, the tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. "Are you saying someone wiped my memory deliberately?" Yes. She absorbed this. The anger came second. First came a strange cold clarity, the mind's defensive insistence on logic before feeling. Someone had taken her name from her, had taken her face from her in the sense that she could not recognize it, had left her at the boundary of this particular estate, where this particular man would find her. "Why here?" she said. "Why this estate?" He did not answer immediately, and she recognized by now what his careful silences meant. He was deciding how much to give her. Not from cruelty, from a calculation of what she could hold without breaking. "The Vane bloodline," he said finally, "carries a specific quality. It is attuned, you might say, to certain old workings, to this land, to certain objects." He gestured slightly toward the locket which she still held. This estate was designated as a sanctuary for that lineage, in a compact made a very long time ago. A compact with whom? With my kind. She looked at him steadily. In the daylight, with the locket warm in her fingers and a portrait of her own face from 1742 fresh in her mind, she found she was ready for what she had begun to suspect. "Tell me," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Vampires are not mythology. They are. We are. A reality that has existed alongside human civilization for longer than civilization has had written records. What you know of us from stories is largely wrong. What is correct is the broad shape, immortality, sensitivity to sunlight, the necessity of blood." He paused. "And certain other qualities that you will observe in time, or have already begun to." She thought of the stillness, the candlelight, the way he had not aged in what must have been centuries. "Isadora," she said. Did she become? No. Quick and definite. She remained human, as you are human. The compact was one of protection, not conversion. My kind pledged to guard the Vane lineage. In return, the lineage provided. He stopped. "What?" she pressed. Before he could answer, she moved to return the locket to its pouch, and in the transfer, the clasp caught against the edge of the velvet and drew a bright, thin line across the pad of her thumb. The pain was minimal. The blood was not. It welled faster than seemed proportionate, a single drop falling, catching the gray light, landing on the stone floor between them. She heard the change in the room's quality before she identified what had changed. A very slight shift in the quality of the stillness. She looked up. Ambrose had gone very still in a different way. He was looking at the drop of blood on the floor, not at her. At the blood. His expression was controlled, as it always was, but she saw the effort behind it now as she had not seen effort there before. His jaw had set. The amber of his eyes had, in the fractional second before he controlled it, gone fractionally darker. He exhaled slowly through his nose. When he looked up and met her gaze, the effort had resolved. He was himself again, immaculate in his composure. "Forgive me," he said, with a formality that she understood was not about manners, but about steadiness, a structure he was placing around himself. "I am quite well." He crossed to a cabinet, found a cloth, returned and offered it to her. Not touching her hand, only offering the cloth. She pressed it against her thumb. "That happens," she said. "When you—" "Yes." He returned to the window. He stood with his back to her for a moment, and she watched the line of his shoulders, the deliberate evenness of his breathing. When he turned again, he was entirely composed. "The compact," he said, as though they had not stopped, "required the lineage to provide a token of trust at intervals. A blood remembrance." He met her eyes. "It is bound into the locket you are holding, which means the locket recognized you and released that memory fragment, because you are of Isadora's blood. You are her descendant, Cordelia, many generations removed, but genuine." She looked down at the locket in her uninjured hand. "Then whoever suppressed my memory knew this," she said. "They knew what I was, and they brought me here anyway. Or they brought you here because of it," he said, "as a message, as a provocation." His voice was even, but something beneath it was not. To me, she dreamed that night with unusual clarity, not the fragmented chaos of ordinary dreaming. This was a dream with the precision of memory, linear and weighted and saturated in sensory detail. She stood in a room she recognized as the library but younger. The books fewer, the furniture heavier, the firelight from a fireplace built differently than the one she had sat beside. A woman sat at the desk with her back to Cordelia, writing rapidly, a quill moving across parchment with the confidence of long practice. The woman turned. Isadora Vane had her face and her gray eyes, but her expression was different. Where Cordelia's was uncertain, Isadora's was marked by something that had been tested and held. Not hardness, endurance. She looked at Cordelia across 2 centuries of dreaming with an expression that carried no surprise whatsoever. "You have found it," Isadora said. Her mouth did not move, but Cordelia heard the words clearly, in the particular way of dreams where the mechanism of communication does not matter. "The locket remembers everyone who has carried it, including me, who suppressed my memory," Cordelia said. "The coven," Isadora said. "They have tried to break the compact before. They will try again." Her gray eyes were steady. "He will not want to tell you everything. Not because he conceals from cruelty, he was never cruel, but because he has learned that telling the full truth before the listener is ready only breaks what you need unbroken. Tell me something he won't." Isadora was quiet for a moment. Then, the compact is not merely protection. It was made because he loved someone of our blood once. Before any of us living were alive, the compact was his way of keeping faith with what was lost. She paused. "He has kept it for 300 years without fail. Which tells you what manner of man he is, whatever else he might be." Cordelia woke before dawn. She lay in the darkness and let the dream settle. It had the texture of truth, not the slippery quality of subconscious invention, but something sedimented, specific, delivered rather than created. The locket on the nightstand glinted in the moonlight through the worked glass. She did not touch it again. She was thinking about what Isadora had said. The coven, the second lore element Ambrose had mentioned without naming coven law. She had heard it in his voice the previous day. The way one says the name of an institution with the careful neutrality of long, complicated history at breakfast, which Tobias provided without fanfare and which she ate at a long table in a dining room clearly not used for dining often, the chair at the table's head freshly dusted. She found a book placed beside her plate. Old, bound in dark green cloth, its spine reading, "A History of Bloodline Compacts." No author named. She opened it. The handwriting inside was very familiar. It was Ambrose's. She spent the morning reading. It was not a dry historical document. It read more like a series of case notes, precise and unsentimental, compiled across what appeared to be decades. In it she found the Vane Compact, its terms, its date, its original parties. The terms were specific. The Vane bloodline would live under the protection of Ravensmoor and its lord. In exchange, the bloodline would provide, at intervals of need, a blood remembrance, freely given, not taken, to renew the binding that kept the estate's boundaries intact. These boundaries, she gathered, were not merely property lines. They were something older, something that kept certain things in and certain things out. The coven was mentioned in the margins in smaller handwriting. Additions made later, she thought. A governing body, older than Ambrose himself it seemed, or at least differently situated in whatever hierarchy governed his kind. They'd contested the compact from the beginning on the grounds that it gave a human bloodline too much proximity to a lord of standing. They had lost 3 centuries ago. They had not, apparently, stopped trying. She closed the book when she heard his footsteps, distinguishable from Tobias's by their absolute precision, each step measured exactly like the last. She was beginning to learn the sound of him. "You left me a book," she said, when he appeared in the doorway. "I thought it more useful than another conversation at which you could not ask questions freely." She looked at him. He was, as ever, immaculate. Dark clothing, dark hair, composure like a coat he never removed. He stood in the doorway with one hand resting against its frame, and she noticed that he did not cross the threshold until she had acknowledged his presence. as though he were observing some old courtesy. "The coven suppressed my memory," she said. "You believe that?" "I do. And they sent me here, or led me here, deliberately. As what? A provocation? A trap?" He considered. "Both, possibly. Your presence here as a vain descendant activates the compact terms. It forces a blood remembrance, which you cannot provide without knowing what you are, what is being asked, and why." He paused. "If you do not provide it willingly, within a certain period, the binding weakens. Is the binding weakened sufficiently, the coven has grounds to declare the compact void. And if the compact is void, then this land falls under their jurisdiction, and you would no longer be under my protection." His voice was perfectly even, but she heard the weight beneath it. She met his gaze across the table. "You've done this for 300 years, she said. "Kept the compact, kept the boundaries." "Yes, for a bloodline of people you don't know." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew the first of them," he said. "That was sufficient reason." She thought of what Isidore had told her in the dream. She thought about what kind of man honored a promise for 3 centuries after the person he made it to was gone. "Then, we need to recover my memory," she said. "All of it, before the coven acts." Something shifted in his expression, not relief, but the slight relaxation of a long-held tension. "Yes," he said, "we do." The suppression glamour, he explained, had a specific architecture. It was not like fog, not a general obscuring of everything equally, but more like a lock, targeted, precise, applied to the specific layers of self that held identity. Name, face, history. The emotional memory, interestingly, had been less fully suppressed. She had retained certain instincts, certain recognitions, certain reactions that belonged to whoever she was. "Can it be reversed?" she asked. "It can be dismantled," he said. "Carefully. The wrong approach risks." He paused. "Risks what?" "Permanence," he said. "If the dismantling is careless, the locked material can be lost rather than released. I have seen it once." He did not elaborate, and she did not press. They worked in the library over the following days. Worked was perhaps not the right word. It was less active than that, and stranger. Ambrose had, in his archive of centuries, texts that described the glamour's construction in enough detail to suggest a method of reversal. The method involved, at its core, something called a memory anchor, an object or sensation or word that had been present at the moment of casting, which could serve as a key to unlock what had been sealed. The locket, clearly, was one. The flash she had experienced when she first held it, that fragment of firelight in a woman's voice, was evidence that it was already working on her, slowly. "It may take time," he said on the 3rd morning of their work. The glamour was thorough. Whoever cast it was skilled. "You think it was the coven directly? Not someone hired by them?" "Someone hired by them," he said, "would have produced cruder work. This has the signature of a very old practitioner." She was sitting across from him at a table he had cleared of its usual archaeological accumulation to give them room to spread the relevant texts. He sat on the other side with 2 books open before him, reading with the particular focused quality that she had begun to find strangely comfortable. He read the way he did everything, completely, without distraction, without restlessness. She had been watching him, she realized. She brought her attention back to the pages before her. "Ambrose," she said. "Yes." "What was her name?" "The first of the vain line that you knew." A pause. He did not look up from his book immediately. When he did, his expression was as composed as ever, but she had gotten better at reading the quality behind the composure, and what she saw there was old and quiet and not something she wished to push it carelessly. "Alara?" he said. She nodded and did not ask anything more about it. He looked down at his book. That afternoon, while he was in a different part of the house and she was alone in the library, she held the locket again and waited. The memory came, longer this time, a full sequence rather than a flash. She was in a different house, smaller, in a room that smelled of beeswax and dried lavender. She was a child, no more than 8 or 9, sitting on a cold floor while a woman stood above her. The woman was her mother. She knew it with the certain knowledge of blood, though the face was indistinct, as though the glamour still held that detail in reserve. Her mother was speaking to her, but the words were too muffled, as though heard through glass. Then her mother pressed the locket into her hands, her child hands, and said, clearly, with sudden piercing clarity, "Remember this house, remember what we are. If you ever lose yourself, follow it home." The memory dissolved. Cordelia sat in the library with the locket pressed against her sternum and her eyes closed, and she did not move for a very long time. Follow it home. This house. Ravensmoor. She had been told about it as a child. She had been prepared, in some way, for the possibility of exactly this, of losing herself and needing to find her way back. The locket was a key her mother had given her before the door was locked, which meant her mother had known this was a possibility, had feared it, had feared the coven. She was standing when Ambrose returned, the locket held loosely in her hand, her posture very straight. "I remembered something," she said. "Not everything, but something." He crossed to her and measured steps and stopped a proper distance away, looking at her face with that careful attention. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened without interruption. He was, she had found, an extraordinary listener, giving everything said its full weight rather than processing it behind the mask of a patient expression. When she finished, he was quiet. "Your mother knew the coven might move against you," he said. "Yes. Which means she knew who I was, what I was. The lineage was not a secret in our family." She looked at him. "Do you have any record of her? A vain woman, perhaps 40 years ago, perhaps in this region?" "I will look." He said it as a commitment, not a courtesy. "But Cordelia." He met her eyes. "This means you were targeted, specifically, deliberately targeted as a vain descendant. The coven has been planning this, or something like this, for years. Your erasure was not improvised." The weight of that settled over her slowly. "So I am a threat to them," she said, "simply by existing. You are the current holder of a lineage they have spent 3 centuries trying to invalidate." "Yes." He paused. "I should have found you sooner. I should have—" Something crossed his face, brief and suppressed. "I should have been monitoring the lineage more carefully. The last documented vein was your grandmother, and when she died with no apparent heirs, I believed the line ended." His voice had gone slightly quieter. "I was wrong." "You didn't know," she said. "No," he agreed. "But that does not make the lapse less consequential." He looked at her with a directness that had something behind it she was not yet certain how to name. "You are here now, and I will not make the same error again." He had not thought about Alara in many years. That was not entirely accurate. He never stopped thinking about Alara. She was simply not the subject of active thought. The way a room one has lived in long enough becomes part of one's perception, rather than an object of it. She was structural. She had been dead for 321 years, and she was still structural. He stood at the window of his private study at 3 in the morning and looked at the dark garden and thought about the fact that the girl sleeping somewhere in the east wing of this house had Isadora, Vane's face, had therefore Elara's eyes, that gray that was almost silver, that he had looked at in 17 different painted faces across 3 centuries and never grown accustomed to. The compact was not, as he had suggested to Cordelia, merely a matter of honor. It was penance, the most productive form of grief he had been able to devise, turned the loss into a structure, a system, something ongoing that required maintenance and attention and therefore kept him from the particular stillness of despair that was, for one of his age and nature, genuinely dangerous. Keep faith with what remains, his oldest teacher had once told him, long before Alara was born. When you lose what mattered, transfer the mattering. Don't let it go dark. He had transferred it to the Vane bloodline. Carefully, professionally, without sentiment. Or so he had believed. He was less certain of that now. The letter had arrived that morning by a means he would not explain to Tobias and could not entirely explain to himself. It had appeared on his desk between 1 hour and the next, sealed with the coven's mark. Its contents were as follows. The coven acknowledged the presence of a Vane descendant at Ravensmoor. They would allow 30 days for the blood remembrance to be formally performed and witnessed. If it was not, the compact was void by the old laws, and the coven would take custody of the estate and its inhabitants. Inhabitants. The word was doing something very specific in that sentence. He had folded the letter and locked it in the cabinet where he kept things that required careful handling. She must not know about the deadline. Not yet. The memory was returning on its own, piece by piece, the locket working on the glamour the way water worked on limestone. Too much pressure would fracture rather than dissolve. He needed another 2 weeks at most before enough of her memory had returned to make the remembrance possible. He could keep the coven out for 2 weeks. He had done harder things, what he had not done. And this was the problem, the unfamiliar difficulty he was turning over in the small hours of the morning, was lived with someone in this house, not since Isadora, who had been here for 8 months before her memory had fully returned and she had gone back to her life, never entirely forgetting where she had been. He had grown accustomed to the sound of Cordelia in the library, to the way she asked questions, directly, without apology but never aggressively, to the quality of attention she gave when he spoke, as though every word were worth measuring. He had grown accustomed to her too quickly. He returned to his book. He did not sleep. He had not needed sleep in 3 centuries. But he read until the light changed, and he allowed himself nothing more than that. Return to third person limited. Cordelia's POV. She found the letter. Not because she had searched for it. She had been looking for a specific text on blood compact history in the cabinet he had directed her to. And the cabinet's lock had not fully caught, and when she opened it, the folded paper was sitting on top of the book she needed. She had not intended to read it. She read it. 30 days. The letter was dated. She counted back. 22 days remained. She refolded the letter precisely as she had found it, and replaced it, and took the book she had come for and returned to the library and sat down and opened the book and did not read a single word of it. He had not told her. He had been managing the timeline without telling her, protecting her from the pressure. She could see exactly why. She could even see that he was not wrong about the fragility of the recovery process, but the knowledge sat in her chest with a specific weight. Not betrayal. Not quite. But the weight of being protected from something you needed to know. When he came in that evening, she was still sitting at the table. "There is a deadline," she said. Very long pause. "Yes," he said. 22 days. Yes. She looked up at him. "What happens to me if the coven takes the estate?" His jaw was set in the way she had seen once before. When she had cut herself, the effort of composure made visible. "They take custody," he said carefully, "of all persons on the estate under the compact's jurisdiction. That means me." "Yes. And what would they do with me?" He was quiet for long enough that the answer was answer enough. "We have 22 days, she said. "What do we need to do?" He looked at her steadily. Something in his expression had shifted. She could see him recalculating, adjusting to her, meeting her where she was rather than where he had assumed she would be. "You need to recover enough of yourself to give consent," he said. "Truly informed consent. The remembrance requires it." "Then help me," she said. "All of it. Tell me everything. I am not as fragile as you think." He studied her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "I am beginning to see that you are not." The memories came faster after that. She thought it was partly because she stopped waiting for them. Stopped sitting with the locket in careful stillness, waiting for something to arrive, and started simply living in the house. She walked the grounds in the cold mornings, the frost-hardened grass crunching beneath borrowed boots, and stood at the boundary markers Ambrose had described, tall stones, carved with symbols, placed at the 4 cardinal edges of the estate. She could feel something at them, not quite warmth, not quite sound, a presence, a rightness, like the sensation of standing in a room that has been kept at exactly the correct temperature. The estate knew her, she thought. Or some part of it did, the part that had been constructed 3 centuries ago to recognize the vein line. On the 15th day, she remembered her mother's name. She was standing in the kitchen early in the morning waiting for the kettle, and it simply arrived, Catherine. Her mother's name was Catherine, and the house they had lived in was small and cold and on a hillside that overlooked a river. and her mother had taught her to read by candlelight because the electricity was unreliable and the candles were more dependable anyway. She had gray eyes like Cordelia's, and she told old stories. Stories about a family that had once been important, had once been known, had once had a compact with an old and powerful house in the north. She had not understood those stories as a child. She understood them now. She went to find Ambrose. He was in the repository, cataloging something. She found him at the long central table with a set of papers spread before him, working through them with methodical care. He looked up when she came in. "I remembered my mother," she said. He set down his pen. "Catherine," she said. "Catherine Vane. She knew about the compact. She told me stories about it." She paused. "She died when I was 12. Illness. I was taken in by a family that was not mine. They did not know the stories, did not know what I was." She was discovering the shape of her history as she spoke it, feeling each memory click into place with the precision of a key in a lock. "I grew up not knowing, not until recently. Someone found me, told me. And then, the glamour," Ambrose said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Someone found me, told me the truth about my lineage, and then took the truth away. The same person." The implication settled between them. "A coven agent," he said. "They wanted me to arrive here without knowing why," she said. "Confused enough to be manageable. They assumed I would be frightened, disoriented, that I would run rather than stay." She paused. "They underestimated the locket." "And you?" he said. His voice was quiet, the statement not embellished. She sat down across from him at the table. The repository was warm, a small fireplace at the far wall, doing its work efficiently. And the light was better here than in most parts of the house, with a series of high windows that caught the afternoon at its best angle. "I have a question," she said, "about the remembrance." "Yes." "It requires blood, freely given." "Yes." He met her eye steadily. "A small amount, symbolic in quantity. The old law does not require more, but it must be willing. The compact cannot be renewed through coercion or ignorance." He paused. "This is why your restored memory matters. The act must be made in full knowledge of what you are consenting to, what it means for the binding." "What does it mean for the binding?" she said. "Specifically," another of his careful pauses, "it renews the compact's terms for 1 generation, protects the lineage, strengthens the estate's boundaries." He looked at the table, "and it creates a thread between the blood given and the one who receives it, a connection, not permanent, not coercive, but present. You would be able to feel, distantly, whether the compact remains intact, and I would have a faint awareness of your well-being." She looked at him. "You receive it?" "Yes." He met her eyes. "I am the lord of this compact. The blood remembrance is between the lineage and its guardian." She thought about that. She thought about what Isadora had told her in the dream. He was never cruel. And about the letter she had found, and about the way he read and the way he listened and the way he had said, "I will not make the same error again," with something beneath the words that had moved her. "All right," she said. 7 days. "Yes. Tell me anything else I need to know, everything you've been calibrating." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he began to speak. He spoke for 2 hours, sitting across from her in the warm repository with the afternoon light coming through the high windows. And he told her everything, the full history of the coven's objections, the legal mechanisms of the compact, the precise nature of the binding it created. She listened without interrupting. She asked questions at the end, sharp and specific, and he answered them all. When they finished, it was nearly dark. She stood, and he stood with her. And for a moment, they were simply standing in the same room in the approaching dark, close enough that she could have reached across the table and touched his hand if she had wished to. She did not. But she noticed the wish and filed it away. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." "You asked me not to underestimate you," he said. "I am trying to honor that." She nodded. She went to the door. She stopped. "Ambrose," she said without turning. "Alara." She chose to go back. A long pause. "Yes," he said, "and you let her." "Yes." She turned then, just enough to see his profile in the dim room. "That was the right thing," she said. "That was the right thing to do." He said nothing. She left, but she thought, walking back through the candlelit corridor, that the quality of his silence had been different from all his previous silences. Not contained, not controlled, but simply present, as though she had said something that did not require an answer, and he had allowed himself to receive it. On the 23rd day, she remembered her own name. It came in the night. She woke suddenly, entirely, from a dead sleep, and it was simply there, whole and complete in hers, Cordelia Vane. Not a name borrowed from a document. Her name, the one her mother had spoken 10,000 times in all its variations, the one attached to her childhood and her history and the small cold house on the hillside above the river. She lay in the dark and said it quietly to herself, twice. Then she got up, wrapped herself in the blanket, and went to find him. He was in the library, as she had expected, reading. He looked up when she came in, and she wondered whether he heard her coming. The particular quality of her footsteps, distinct from Tobias's and therefore distinct from silence, or whether he simply always looked up when anyone crossed the threshold. "My name is Cordelia Vane," she said. "I remember all of it now." He studied her face. She thought he was reading something in it, some quality of presence that had been incomplete before and was complete now. He set his book down. "Yes," he said, quietly, "you look different. I imagined so." She crossed to the chair that had become, over the weeks, hers by custom, and sat. "I know who I am. I know why I'm here. I know what the coven wants and what the compact requires." She looked at him. "We have 7 days remaining." "Yes, I want to do the remembrance," she said. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, not because I have to. I'm aware I could refuse, and I understand what that would mean for the estate. I want to do it because it's right, because it's mine to do and I choose to do it and no one is making me." He was very still, the deep stillness, not the controlled kind, the natural kind. "You understand the thread," he said, "the connection it creates." "Yes," she held his gaze. "I understand it. I'm not afraid of it." A pause. "Are you?" Something moved across his face. She was very good at reading him now after weeks in this house, and what she saw was not quite what she expected. Not composure struggling to contain nothing, but composure struggling to contain something real. "I have been afraid of very few things in 3 centuries, he said. "This, the possibility of caring what happens to someone again, is one of them." It was the most he had given her of himself, and they both knew it. She did not make it larger than it was. She did not reach toward it, or press it, or turn it over in the light. She simply received it. "I know," she said. "I think that's why you didn't tell me about the deadline. Not only to protect the recovery." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "Not only for that." She looked at the fire. She thought about all the things she knew now, and all the things she had not known 3 weeks ago. Her name, her face, her mother's voice, her lineage's history. This man who had kept faith with something he loved across 3 centuries without demanding anything for it. "The remembrance tomorrow," she said. "And then we deal with the coven." "They will not accept the renewal without contest," he said. "When the binding is renewed, they will feel it. They may send representatives. Then they'll find the compact intact and the lineage represented, and you with 3 centuries of precedent behind you." She looked back at him. "I'm not afraid of them." "You should be a little," he said. "Not as a warning. Honest." "All right," she conceded. "A little, but not enough to stop." He almost smiled. She had seen it once before. The precise edge of an expression that did not quite arrive but was present in the attempt. She filed it alongside other things she had begun to collect about him, in the private inventory of a person who was paying attention. The next morning, they stood in the repository before the cabinet that held the locket and the relevant texts. Tobias had been sent to the village on an errand that would keep him occupied until afternoon. The room was quiet, cold enough that she could see her breath, Ambrose stood across from her, correctly formal, giving the moment its correct weight. Between them, the locket lay on a cloth on the table's surface, gleaming in the gray light. "You need only to say it," he said. "The consent must be spoken. Then give me your hand." She nodded. She thought about her mother pressing the locket into her child hands and saying, "Follow it home." She thought about Isadora Vane, sitting at a desk 2 centuries ago, who had been here before her and found her way through. She thought about what Ambrose had done for 300 years without being asked to, and without asking for anything in return. "I am Cordelia Vane," she said, "last of my bloodline, and I give this freely, in knowledge and in will, in renewal of the compact made between my line and this house." She held out her right hand. He took it. His hand was cool, always cool, and very careful. He did not look at her while he produced a small blade and made the briefest, most controlled cut along the pad of her thumb. She barely felt it. He brought her hand to his lips. Barely contact, the gentlest possible touch, the absolute minimum the compact required. She felt the thread form, not metaphorically, but as a genuine sensation, a warmth settling at the base of her sternum that was not quite hers and was not quite hers, and was not quite his. He released her hand and stepped back and pressed the cloth to her thumb, precisely as he had weeks ago, offering it without touching. "It is done," he said. His voice was entirely even. She looked at him. "Is it always like that?" "No," he said. After a pause, "No, it is not." The coven's representatives arrived on a Tuesday. Cordelia was in the garden when they came, standing at the eastern boundary stone, one hand resting on its carved surface, feeling the renewed warmth of the binding that now ran through it like a current. She had been doing this most mornings, learning the estate's new resonance, the way the binding felt different now that it had been renewed. Stronger, more present, as though the land had exhaled after a long-held breath. She felt, through the thread, the precise moment Ambrose became alert. She straightened, removed her hand from the stone, walked back to the house with measured steps. There were 3 of them, standing in the entry hall when she came through the side door. Their clothing was formal, dark, wrong in a way she could not immediately specify. Too correct, perhaps, or correct according to rules that were not this house's rules. 2 she did not recognize. The third, a woman, perhaps 50 in apparent age, with silver hair drawn back severely and eyes that were not amber but something colder, she recognized by the quality of the stillness. Ambrose stood between them in the corridor that led deeper into the house. He had not moved, and his stillness was the natural kind, the bone-deep kind, but it was doing something different than it usually did. It was doing something very clear. This is where the permitted space ends. "Cordelia," he said without looking away from the 3 visitors. "This is the coven emissary, Mira Voss, and 2 of her attendants." "Lady Voss," Cordelia said. The silver-haired woman looked at her with the expression of someone revising a calculation. "Miss Vane," she said. "Or is it now? The compact would have restored your memory, if renewed." "It has been renewed," Cordelia said. "As of 3 days ago, I gave the blood remembrance freely, in full knowledge, consented aloud. Lord Ambrose received it. The binding is intact. You may verify it at any of the boundary stones." Mira Voss's expression did not change. "The coven disputes the legitimacy of the renewal on the grounds that the suppression glamour may have compromised the freedom of consent." "A clever argument," Cordelia said, "except the glamour was dissolved before the remembrance was performed. My memory was fully restored. I acted without constraint." She held the emissary's gaze steadily. "The glamour your operative cast, incidentally, is itself a violation of the compact's terms. Interference with a protected lineage member. I would be very careful, Lady Voss, about which violations you choose to raise in a formal contest." A silence. Ambrose had still not moved, but she felt, through the thread, faintly, warmly, at the base of her sternum, something she could only describe as recognition. He had not expected this from her, or rather, he had hoped for it. And the hope had been met. Mira Voss looked between them. Her cold eyes took in whatever was between them. The thread was not visible, was never visible. But something of it must have been apparent to a vampire of her age and experience, because her expression changed, a very slight recalibration. "The compact stands," she said finally, "subject to review." "It has stood for 300 years, Ambrose said. His voice was perfectly even. "Review it as often as you like." The emissary left. Her attendants followed. The door closed behind them with a click that echoed in the stone entry hall. And then the house was quiet. Cordelia stood in the entry hall and breathed. "That was well done," Ambrose said. "She was expecting a confused girl with no memory," Cordelia said. "The coven's plan required one." She looked at him. "The operative who cast the glamour. Someone gave me information and then took it away." "Who was it? Is there any way to know?" "I have suspicions," he said carefully. "Nothing provable yet. But you'll look." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "I am going to be looking more carefully, going forward, at what happens to the members of your lineage." A pause. "At what happens to you." It was not a declaration. It was not the kind of statement that could be responded to with a particular kind of answer without presuming too much, but it was something, and they both knew what that something was, in the way that two people who have spent 3 weeks in close attention to each other come to know what words are carrying and what they are not. "I know," she said. "You should also know," he said with a careful deliberateness, "that you are welcome here, not because the compact requires it, not because your lineage is tied to this house. You specifically, Cordelia Vane, are welcome in this house for as long as you choose to stay." She looked at him, at the long, serious line of him, immaculate in his dark clothing, standing in his entry hall that had been his entry hall for 3 centuries, looking at her with amber eyes that carried the weight of all of that, and the particular additional weight of whatever she had become in the course of 3 weeks of mornings in the library, and evenings in the repository, and nights when the house breathed around them both. "I know that too," she said. "I'm not ready to leave." Something resolved in his expression. The word resolved was right. It was not relief, not happiness in any straightforward sense, but a settling, a rightness, like the estate's boundary stones when she pressed her hand to them. "Then don't," he said. Simply, she nodded once. She went back through the side door to the garden. After a moment she heard his footsteps behind her, precise, unhurried, exactly measured, and he came to stand beside her at the threshold, looking out at the frost-pale grounds. He did not speak, neither did she. The thread between them was warm. He had told himself, in the early weeks, that it was Isadora's eyes, that what he felt when he looked at Cordelia Vane was the memory of Alara, redirected by the accident of a bloodline's persistence. That gray, almost silver, that quality of endurance in the face that was not hardness, but something better, and he was simply responding to history, as he always had, as a man of his age and nature could not help doing. He understood now that this was not true. Alara had been his first and his most formative grief, and she would remain structural for as long as he existed, which was likely to be a very long time. That was not negotiable. But the feeling that had grown in him over 3 weeks of careful proximity to this specific woman, this particular quality of attention she gave the world, the precision of her questions, the steadiness with which she had stood in his entry hall and dismantled the coven emissary's argument with 3 sentences, that was not memory. That was present. That was new. He had not had a great deal of new in 3 centuries. He had not expected it. He stood beside her in the garden, in the cold of the morning, and did not say any of this. It was too early for declarations. They had known each other for 3 weeks, she had her memory back for 5 days, and he had no intention of pressing anything. He had 3 centuries of patience. He was perfectly capable of using them. What he allowed himself was simply this, standing beside her in the cold, the thread between them warm and intact at the base of his sternum, watching the frost on the dead grass glitter in the weak winter light. It was, he thought, sufficient. For now, the memories had all returned by the end of the month, in the unhurried way that the last of them arrived. Not with a flash of recognition, but with a quiet accumulation, details settling into their places like furniture being moved back after cleaning. She knew her full history now. She knew who she was, where she had come from, how she had come to be here. She stayed. She told herself it was practical. At first, the coven's challenge had not been fully resolved. There was a formal review pending, a process that could take months, and her presence at Ravensmoor as the active lineage holder strengthened the compact in ways that mattered. Ambrose had explained this clearly and without any suggestion that this was why she should stay. The distinction was careful and she appreciated it, but the practicality was only part of it, and she knew the other part, and she was not afraid of knowing it. She spent her mornings at the boundary stones, and her afternoons in the library or the repository, reading her way through 3 centuries of history with Ambrose as an occasional guide. She would ask questions, and he would answer them. And sometimes he would ask questions in return. Careful questions about her life before Ravensmoor, the childhood she remembered now, the years she had spent without knowing her lineage, and she would answer them with the same care he gave his own answers. They were learning each other. It was slow. It was correct. It suited them both. One evening in the library, 6 weeks after the coven emissary had left, she looked up from her book and found him already looking at her. Not with the careful watchfulness of someone managing a ward or observing a complicated situation, but with something quieter and more private than that, something he had clearly not intended to be visible. He moved his gaze back to his book without comment. She moved hers back to hers. A minute passed. "Ambrose," she said. "Yes, I would like to stay past winter." A pause. "Past winter is fine," he said. "Indefinitely, I mean." A longer pause. She kept her eyes on her book. "That is also fine," he said, with a deliberateness that was not casualness, that both of them knew was not casualness. She turned a page. "Good," she said. Another silence, but a different one. The kind that contained things that did not need to be said immediately, that could wait in the warmth between 2 people and be said later, better, when the time was right. She had learned about time from this house. It had 3 centuries in its walls, this house. 3 centuries of a man keeping faith with something he loved, tending a compact, cataloging histories, maintaining the stillness of a person who has learned what endurance requires and is willing to give it. She thought she understood now why the house breathed the way it did. It had a very long practice of waiting for something to return. She was not Elara. She was not Isadora. She was herself. Cordelia Vane, 26 years old, gray-eyed, with calluses on her right hand and a scar on her wrist she could now remember acquiring, and a mother named Catherine who had given her a locket and told her to follow it home. She was herself. Sitting in the library of a man who had tended her bloodline for 300 years without asking for anything, looking at the fire and feeling, at the base of her sternum, the warm and constant thread that connected her to the estate, to the binding, to him. The coven review would proceed. She would be present for it. She would stand in whatever room they required her to stand in and speak clearly and without apology, and the compact would hold because it had always held, and because she intended it to. After that, she was not certain what after that looked like, in detail. She thought it looked like this: winter becoming spring, the frost leaving the grounds, the estate's borders intact and warm, long evenings in the library, the careful accumulation of something that was being built honestly, without rush, between 2 people who had both learned that the things worth having required patience. She looked up again. He was reading. The firelight was still in the room. It was always still in this room, and his profile in it was composed and quiet and entirely itself. She looked at him for a moment, letting herself, and then looked back at her book. She was, she thought, home.